Has being on someone else's podcast been on like your I must do this in 2023 or 2024? That is what I am talking to today's guest about. Hello, and welcome back to the Business First Creatives podcast. I am here with Christina Lenkowski, who is going to be telling us why guesting on someone else's podcast is amazing and how you can make sure that your pitch is as good as it can get before you actually hit send on that email. Christina, hello, and welcome to the Business First Creatives podcast.
Hello. Thank you. I am so jazzed to be in front of your audience today. These are my people, creatives. Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. And I really want to get into how they can become even more visible and using one of the easiest ways to be getting visible in front of other people's audiences.
I mean, let's just start there. You gave me a great soft pitch into our topic.
You. Yeah.
So why is podcasting like an easy way to get visible? Like what makes podcasting as a guest easier than like the other mediums that we think about in terms of borrowing someone else's audience?
I love this question. And there's kind of a two-part answer to it. So the first is that you literally just got to show up. You literally just got to show up. Now, of course, I'm talking about after you've done the pitch and, we'll get into this. Or if you work with an agency like mine and you have someone pitch for you, you literally just show up, you do a little research and then you're kind of there. But I have worked in PR for almost 20 years. And in my 20 years of PR, I have narrowed down completely into only doing podcasts because I really believe in the power of them. I believe when you get to get in front of your ideal audience and tell your story and share your value and drive someone back to your whatever, your email list, your social channels, etc., that is such a warm lead. That is someone that is ready to buy from you, to learn from you, etc. Like I said, I've worked in PR for a long time. I've done the print, I've done the TV, I've done the radio, I've done all these things. And I'm not here to say that they are not worth your time. It's great to get a fancy logo on your website, to be doing this type of stuff. But a lot of times that's just your ego. That's just for your ego. That's not actually what's going to make you money. When I'm quoted in an article, like in a publication, no one's going back to figure out more about me and XYZ. They're just reading the article. Right? When someone hears me in a podcast, they hear my story, they hear me talking, they hear me and Colie having this conversation. That's when they're like, oh, I got to figure out how I can work with her, how I can learn from her, what I could do that would make the most sense. But they're ready to go. They're a really warm, hot lead. And all you have to do is have a genuine conversation.
And I will say, I actually only really started listening to podcasts in like the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I'm not afraid to admit that.
We're in a safe space. Yeah.
I think of podcast listeners as like kind of like your very own cult.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that when you love someone's podcast, like Tuesday, let's just say Tuesdays, 2 of my best friends drop their podcasts. And when I'm taking Colie to school in the morning on a Tuesday, those are the first 2 podcasts that I listen to.
Yes.
And it's not just them because they're my besties. I have come into contact with a lot of really great people through listening to their podcasts. Mm-hmm. And if you like what they say on one podcast, you are really very likely to hit that subscribe button and keep on listening. And so if I love someone's podcast and I'm listening to them, and let's say that they're doing a mix of solo episodes and guest episodes, I mean, every single one of their guests, as long as they have something valuable to say, I'm usually going to their Instagram, looking at them, looking at their website, seeing what else it is that they have to offer. I'm subscribing to their podcast if they have one. Mm-hmm. I'm following them on Instagram, whatever it is that I can do to show support, but also make sure that I am staying in their world, mm-hmm. so that when they put their own messaging out, I can hear it. And so I didn't really understand the power of that, number one, until I started listening to podcasts.
Yes.
And then once I got this podcast, I mean, strangers.
Yeah.
will send me an Instagram and be like, okay, so I heard that podcast episode with your virtual assistant and I just hired her.
Great. Yeah, I love that.
I'm this is amazing.
Yes.
So, I mean, there is such power in you pitching yourself to be a guest on someone's podcast, them saying yes, and then them allowing you the privilege of being in front of their audience, because I also feel like we have a relationship. Like if I don't think someone has something valuable to present to my audience, there's no way that I am going to bring them on my show.
No.
Like I want to make sure that everyone that I encourage you to listen to,
your listeners know that. They're like, if Colie brought someone on the show, I'm going to listen to them because she's taken the time to vet that they're going to be the right fit for me, that they're going to bring value to me. So like you said, I'm the same way. I listen to a podcast and I hear someone on there and I'm like, oh, dang, I got to go follow more of their stuff because I really like what they're saying. I really like, their personality. Or guess what? Sometimes I don't. And that's all right too. That's perfectly okay. That's kind of the beauty of this work, is that you're going to repel and attract the people that you're meant to.
Let's talk about those podcast pitches, Christina.
Yeah.
So I have gotten some very bad ones recently. The funny thing is, I feel like for a while I wasn't getting any pitches. And then I got a handful of pitches that were, good. And then I got a lot that were really bad. And so before we get into like your service as the person who could pitch for someone else, what is like the number one thing that you see people doing in podcast pitches that they should absolutely stop doing?
Just one, huh? No, I think that there's multiple things, but I think that the biggest thing is to not come with topics, like fleshed out topics. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people think that they are making it easier on the host by saying, hey, here's the 4 or 5 things that I'm an expert in. Let me bullet out marketing, branding, whatever. And then you tell me what you want to talk about and I'm ready to talk about it. Okay. But that is making it very difficult for the host. That means that they are now having to come up with different topic ideas based around that, etc. And one thing way back from my days at Oregon State University, going through journalism, and everything like that, is we want to make it as easy as possible to get to the yes. So by putting really well thought out topics, and you can, hey, spoiler alert, you can talk about the same things. In fact, that's what I want you to do on multiple shows. So it's not like you're having to come up with new topics every time, but you're going to tailor it a little bit to that specific host and what their exact audience is. But when we come with our topics, they're a solid paragraph. Okay. They are, okay. This is the thing that we want to talk about. Here's maybe an example of that. Christina would love to have this conversation, or whomever our client is would like to have this conversation, talk about it further. And for our hosts, that makes it so easy for them to say yes.
Yes. Okay. And like talking about your topics, I do think that it was really good that you mentioned that you can actually talk about the same topics on multiple podcasts, because I feel like a lot of people think that that is like a faux pas. Like, oh, if I talked about this on Business First Creatives, I can't turn around and talk about this on like the Shoot It Straight podcast. No. If we have 2 completely different audiences and this is your message, like this is the value that you bring, of course you should talk about it on both podcasts. I've actually listened to people on multiple podcasts and there was just one new thing that I learned and I was like, okay, I'm really glad that I listened to that. But like people don't shy away from listening to someone on different podcasts just because, oh, well, I've already heard them talk about that before. I don't know that people do that. People are not like, oh, I'll just skip it this week.
I don't think so either. And I'll tell you, Colie, like I have people that have reached out to me before that have like, well, I just heard you on my second podcast. I just heard you on my third podcast. And now I'm ready to see if we could hop on a call, right? It's that reminder to them. Maybe they have heard me before. They really liked what I had to say, but they heard me again and they're like, oh, okay, now's the time when I'm going to take action. Right. And so I love that you just reiterated that, which is, this isn't like a daily newspaper, right? You don't have to have a scoop. Like there's no scoops involved. We're really out here trying to get the best message that we possibly can out to the right audiences for our business. And so you are going to be telling that same story, but that's what gets that in people's head. That is what makes you the expert in that particular thing that you do.
And the host guys, even if you're coming with the same topic, I mean, I ask different questions than my besties do on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
And I know we've had the same guests.
Yep.
So, I mean, don't think that just because you pitch this one topic to multiple podcasts and they all give you a yes, I mean, the conversation is going to be different because the host is different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the number one thing that you're telling people. They should have a solid topic inside of their inside of their email.
A couple
Is there
topics.
anything else?
A couple. Yeah.
A couple topics. Is there anything else that you are like, this is an absolute must have inside of a podcast pitch?
Yes. And that is, you guys, this is going to seem so basic. Like, you're probably going to hear me say this and you're going to be like, wow, mind blown. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't even use a host name in a pitch. And I think that this is such a, y'all can't see that are listening, but Colie just gave her finger, not her finger, a good finger to me to say yes. She didn't just give me that finger, finger to say, indicate yes, because there's this thing that we call in the PR world a spray and pray. All right. Okay. And so what that is someone that takes just a pitch and they do not personalize it at all. And they just send it out to 100 people, right off the bat. They literally just scour some host emails and they just send them out. Colie knows what I'm talking about. I'm sure she's gotten many of these. Take that time to literally find out the host's name, the name of their show. Find this information out. And by the way, this is all very simple stuff to find. You're not going to have to search for it. You're not going to have to be whatever. You can literally type into Apple Podcasts, Business First Creatives, and Colie's name is going to come in right under that. Okay. So this literally takes 2 seconds, 3 seconds, but it astounds me the number of people that do not make these little efforts to make their pitch even more personalized.
So we're going to jump into like podcast pitching and then when you should consider hiring someone to do this for you. So is there a point where someone has certain goals for visibility, or is there a certain level of business where people should be like, okay, it's time for me to do this, podcast tour. I have a good message. I want to get it out there, but I don't know if I should do this. I should maybe look at someone like Christina and her agency to do this for me. Like, what is the tipping point? Is there a metric, or is there like a thing that you can look at to be like, okay, maybe I should hire this out?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question. And I want to give the caveat that it does vary for sure. But I would say that for the majority of people, they've already made quite a bit of money. So they're already at a point where they're maybe at multiple six figures, 500K, even $1 million for multiple of our clients. And they're like, I have built this business being really good at what I do. I have built this business being really good, referrals, word of mouth, my marketing, etc. But now I'm needing to get in front of new people. Now I'm needing to get in front of new audiences. And so they know that their product sells. They know that who their ideal audience or audiences are. We definitely have clients that have a couple different audiences. That's fine. And they're just ready to basically just show up. Every single one of our clients, I know I kind of joked about it earlier, but that's where they're at in their business. They're at the point where they're like, I don't have the time to do this pitching and research, and I don't know the shows and da-da-da-da-da-da. That is where we absolutely step in and we're like, we got you. Don't worry. We're going to take this all off your hands. And you literally show up, drop your amazing knowledge, network with that host, share the episode, of course, when it goes live. And I want you to repurpose that. And we can talk about that more. But they're at the point where they're ready to just have the easy button on their visibility and their business.
You guys didn't see me, but I'm like, ding. I love easy buttons. I love easy buttons for almost anything, guys. And I will say, being on the other end of, because I've gotten some like, most of the bad pitches that I'm getting, I will admit, they're not from individuals. They're from agencies. And I'm not going to say like yours, because your pitches were definitely different than some of these.
But they are agencies. 100%.
They are agencies. Yeah. And so I feel like there are two different kinds of agencies that you can go for. I feel like some of them are doing the spray and pray, to be honest. Like, even though they've gone with an agency, like some of the pitches that I'm getting, again, don't have my name in them. When I read the bio that they've given me, I'm like, how in the world do they think they go on my podcast? I'm like, okay, so, I just move it over to the never going to be seen again folder.
Yeah.
So Christina, I have gotten 2 pitches from your agency, and both of them were fabulous, because clearly you're sitting here and you were one of them. And the client that they pitched, I'm actually intending to invite on for like Q1, because her topic was financial. And so that's going to be amazing. But one of the things that I really like in a pitch is if they are referencing a previous episode, or if they are indicating like how their pitch is differentiated from someone else that's been on my podcast in the same type of topic. And so how much time, or what is your process in terms of doing research for your clients? Like, how do you make sure that your client is a good fit for like my podcast or whoever you're pitching?
Absolutely. So really it is research. We are looking at the show and we're kind of going back in there and seeing, okay, like for instance, you talked about maybe you had someone on that was already had talked about podcast guesting, right? And that definitely happens. There's absolutely shows that I've been a guest on where they have had someone on before that talks about that. So in our research, we see that we're like, oh, okay, they've had so-and-so on to talk about this. So in our pitch, I reference that. We would say at that point, hey, hey, Colie, I was actually listening to one of your recent episodes with XYZ. I really loved how you guys talked about the benefits of podcast guesting. What I would love to do is come on your show and take your guests to the next level. So what to do during the interview to make them, have the best impact, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all about, in my opinion, calling it out so they know, oh, you've actually paid attention. You see that I've had someone on that's talked about this, but that doesn't mean that this topic is done. That doesn't mean that we can't talk about this anymore. We just need to come from a different angle with it. Now, I have a couple caveats with that. One being, if it's only been a month or two, I'd wait a little bit before sending that email. I'd wait till you were probably like 6 months out from that other person being on the show. Again, if it's like directly the same thing that you do, if you're complimentary to that, meaning let's say like Colie had someone on that was a podcast producer and they were on to talk about, hey, here's how you start your own show, etc. That's not a competition for me. That's not us talking about the same things. So that's perfectly fine for me to be pitching and still reference that, right? So, hey, I saw you had so-and-so on and they're a podcast producer talking about this. I'd actually love to come and talk to your listeners about why guesting on other people's shows is equally as important as having your own.
Tying things together. Christina, that is what I have been working on the more that I have this podcast. I'm loving bringing people together who are similar topics, but not directly in competition, so that when my listeners listen to like one episode, and then the next week there's an episode that takes that topic even further, and then another one, like I have found that that's when my guests take the most action after listening to an episode.
Love
so
that.
I'm really happy that you mentioned that, because I do think it's important. If you have, like for myself, you just said that. So I'm going to say, hey, the last podcast person that I had on was my podcast manager, Haley. I don't know what episode it is. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But she didn't talk about guesting.
Right.
Which is good, because then if I put her in the show notes for this, they can see that there are 2 episodes, both about podcasts, but that are related, and they can get more. They can just get something else from listening to that other episode if they haven't already.
Yes. I love that. And I think like that complementary work is so amazing. And it's also what's so amazing for your networking with the hosts. I think that this is a big thing that people overlook with podcast guesting, but some of the best stuff that our clients say to us, like time and time again, is one of the best parts about working with us, and the best part about being on all these shows, is those relationships with the hosts. And I think that that's so important, because a lot of times the hosts that we work with are complementary to the clients, right? Or for me, like Colie, she has a complementary audience to what I'm looking to do. And so it's a miss for you to just think that you're going to do the interview, hit end on record, and never to be seen from again, right? This is something that you want to grow that relationship. You want to have a real conversation, because hosts can be some of the best affiliate partners, promotional partners on shows that I guest in. I speak in their groups a lot, or I might be invited to be at a summit, something like that. So there are a lot of different opportunities there with the host. And so I want to make sure that your listeners don't sleep on that, because that is a really, really important thing too.
I'm going to say something about the hosting part, because I have 2 things that I just really love. Number one, if you're an amazing guest, please know that I email all of my friends that have podcasts and tell them, hey, Christina was just on my show and she was talking about this, and I don't think that you've had someone talk about this topic yet.
I love that.
Here's her email. You should reach out.
Yes.
I do that all the time.
I love that.
And then I'm so happy when I'm listening to one of my friends' podcasts and I'm like, oh my God, they invited that person on the show. That's
no
amazing.
Pressure. I hope that email goes out after our call. Jeez.
I mean, no worries, Christina. You
Yeah.
are awesome. The second thing that I want to say that was directly tied to what you were talking about is monetizing your podcast guest episodes. So let's talk about that. There, you go on a podcast for free.
Yep.
Sometimes they let you share a freebie. Sometimes they let you share a paid offer. Both are possible. You just need to know which one is your host's preference before you try to pitch something. But like, is that something that your agency does, or does your clients come to you with like an offer that they say, okay, well, this is what I want to pitch? Or do you help them kind of
both?
Like, okay.
Both. We have clients that come to us that are definitely like, this is the offer that I want to have. Like, I want to have, my, all the work that I'm doing right now, I want it to go towards this specific offer, but we're still going to come up with some kind of call to action, right? We're still going to come up with something that's going to nurture that client into there, even if it's something like a free webinar, right? Something that's free. We have a client, I know you know her, Liz Wilcox, or she was a longtime client of ours, and we love her to death. And one thing that she does that I think is really smart is she has people sign up for her freebie, but then they immediately start getting nurtured into her membership.
Yes.
And her first email, I just always love to share this email subject line because I think it's just the greatest thing. But it's like, hey, can I have $9? And that has a huge,
I love that email.
I know. It's so good. It's so good. She has like over 50% or something like that conversion from that email. And so that's what we really want to have, is like, be offering them something to get them in your world, right? To join your e-newsletter list, to start following you on social, etc. But that nurturing and that sales can start right away. That isn't something that you necessarily just have to wait on or anything like that. We also have clients that come to us with different ideas. Like, one was like, we've done it a couple of times since then, but this was her first idea. She was like, I have a book, right? I have a book that I wrote, but I kind of just want to use my book as top of funnel, right? Like, I know once people read the book, then they're more interested in working with me in other areas, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, that sounds great. So what she did was, for like the first 50 people off of a podcast that signed up for it, they just had to pay shipping and handling, and then she would send them the book. And that was a really great way for her to get really solid leads. She knew that book would convert into bigger sales and stuff like that if she just did it in that way. And so I think that you can be really, really creative about what your call to action is and kind of what those thoughts are from there, but do not sleep on it, and do not sleep on having a nurture sequence on the back end, so that you can be continuing to get those, to convert those leads for longer than just a day or two after the interview.
And guys, as your resident systems person, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say there are a couple of things that I really want you to do if you're going to be a guest on someone's podcast. Number one, it's okay to share the same freebie over and over again.
Oh, yes.
But you should have a way of figuring out which podcast they came from. Guys, as a systems person, I went on like 10 podcast interviews and didn't do this. So then I couldn't tell where anybody was coming from. I mean, you can tell if they're opting in, the day after the interview, you can assume they came from that. But like long term, you have no idea what your return on investment is for any individual one of your podcast interviews if you are not tracking on the back end where they came from. And it's as simple as making a different opt-in, labeling it with that podcast, and then giving that podcast host that link versus another link so that you can see in like ConvertKit or Flowdesk or whatever it is where your people came from. The second thing that I want to say is that you should make sure that whatever your call to action is, it's related to what you spoke about on the podcast, but it's also related to what you want them to do after they do the call to action. Like, it doesn't make sense if your call to action is about topic A, but then in your nurture sequence, you're trying to sell them something on a completely different topic. So as Christina said, nurture. But nurture with purpose.
Nurture strategically. I mean, that's the same thing with like the shows you're getting on. And what I mean by that is, like, I have people come up to me a lot at event, like I speak at something and they come up to me afterwards and they're like, yeah, I don't know. I've like been on a couple podcasts and
it hasn't done anything.
It just really hasn't like done anything for me. And so I don't know that really works. And I always have multiple follow-up questions for this.
I know you do.
Yeah, I do, girl. But the first question that I always ask is like, were you getting in front of your ideal audience? Because for a lot of people, the answer is no. And that's something that they might not have realized. They get asked to be on a friend's show. They get asked to be on a client's show. By the way, I'm not anti doing those things. Like, they can be great practice. They can be fun, 100%. Like, I think they're great if you have the time to do it, but you can't expect it to move the needle in your business. You cannot expect to have people become customers when they randomly heard you on some show that is not full of your ideal audience, right? Like, I've been on a couple shows, for instance, I'm type 1 diabetic. So I've been on a couple shows before that kind of talk about having diabetes or having an autoimmune disease and, you know, XYZ. Those were great for me to do. I enjoyed doing them, but I don't expect for them to bring me money. You know what I mean? Like, I don't expect for that to happen in that way. The other question, or the other thing that I really like to ask people is, how many shows? How many? And they don't have to know the exact amount, but typically they'll be like 3 or 4, you know, whatever. Okay. So when okay. So when like, all right. So
we're so bad, Christina.
I know, but I got to teach the people. I got them. I got to get them to know. When we work with our clients, we work with them for a year. And over that year, we guarantee that we'll get them booked on at least 24 podcasts. And I know that some of you that might be listening, they're like, oh my God, 24 podcasts? Yes. Because you need to be consistently getting that message out there over and over and over again. Get that momentum going in your business. Get really crystal clear on your messaging. That is a huge, huge part of the work that we do. You know, because sometimes people come to me and they're like, I'll be like, oh, so like, what shows are you interested in being on? And they'll be like, I don't know, just like Joe Rogan or whatever. I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, like, you haven't even been on a podcast. Like, let's get out onto some shows.
Let's aim a little lower.
Let's aim here. That doesn't mean you can't have big goals. I am a big fan of having big goals. Absolutely. But we got to take the steps to get there. We got to make sure that you're really clear on your message, that you know what topics resonate with people. That happens with our clients sometimes. They think that they know what topic really resonates, and it turns out that it might be something different that people are really, really responding to. And I think that that's important to realize. So get out there. And I always like to say, publicity is like ice. And what I mean by that is, before ice freezes, all this stuff is happening under the surface that we don't see. We don't see it with our human eye. All we see is when that ice freezes. And publicity is a lot like that. You are going to show up over here, over here, over here, all these different places, getting in front of your ideal audience. Everyone's not going to see every single thing that you're doing, but you know that you're doing it. And then boom, that ice is going to freeze and you become the expert in what it is that you do. And that's because you've been showing up all over the place, doing your thing, posting about it, getting the word out there. That's the way that publicity really works.
So I had an episode where it was a marketing episode, and her name is Dana Schaff. She actually works for Anami Tonkin, who I know.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, her marketing manager. So she was on my podcast, and she was talking about the rule of 7. And until you started talking, Christina, I never realized that has to apply to podcasts too. So if you're really expecting someone to see you on 1 or 2 podcasts and take that action, that's just not how the world works. If we use the rule of 7 that we talked about on that previous episode, which I will have linked in the show notes, that means you need at least 7 podcast episodes to the same audience that perhaps has crossover before you actually start to see some momentum, something going towards whatever it is that your end goal is. Christina, I cannot believe I hadn't put that together before now, but yes, 2 and 3 and 4 podcasts is not enough. Also, you mentioned the realistic, everyone needs to have realistic expectations.
Yes.
And I think that we wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we didn't tell people this is definitely a long-term strategy.
Yes.
This is not you go on one podcast episode that airs next month and all of a sudden the sales roll in.
Yes.
Like Christina said, it may take a few podcast guest episodes to get it going. And so if you are booking, let's say 2 a month, and that's, that's pretty optimistic if you've never been on a podcast and you're not having someone pitch for you. But I mean, that's like what, 12 podcast episodes in 6 months? And you might have to still wait a little bit of time to see the returns from those ones. So making sure you know where people come from and having realistic expectations, not only on how long it's going to take, but also making sure that the audience that you're getting in front of is the one that needs to hear your message, is the one that actually needs whatever your offer is, whatever your service is.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to realistic too, really knowing the time that it's going to take if you do decide that you're going to pitch yourself. So I really am overwhelmed when I have to do something weekly, even monthly. That can really just become suddenly I shut down. I'm just like, I can't do this. I don't know that it just keeps getting pushed to the back burner over and over and over again. So the way that this is a hot tip from Christina that I'm dropping on here, but no big deal. But the way that I really recommend, if you kind of feel overwhelmed at all this, is to pitch once a quarter. And what I do with that is I block off a whole day. So I take one whole day in my business, a quarter, block it all the way off. So nothing else can get put in there. You don't have other stuff that you're going to be doing. You're going to drop off the kid at school. If you're like me, you're going to come home, you're going to work until you got to go do that pickup, right? So you're going to take that time, and that is just when you're going to do your pitching. Okay. So you're already going to have a pitch template ready to go. You're going to hopefully have some research done, but some of that day can be devoted to that. And then you're going to be sending off a bunch of pitches. Just get in that mode to do that with the goal of that day of pitching yielding 6 yeses, right? 6 shows that you can be on. To your point, trying to do that 2 a month average. So with the knowledge that some months might have 4, some months might have 1, you know what I mean? Like, that's just kind of the way that it goes. It doesn't have to be very strict on like 2 this month, 2 this month, 2 this month. But with that knowledge of like, okay, over the next year, I want to get on 24 podcasts. And I will say that like, that's a big thing I'm trying to push for people right now is 24 and 24. Your business will look different. Look at me. Yeah. Your business will look different at the end of 2024 if you have been on 24 podcasts. I can guarantee it. And I'm not here to say that it's what it's going to do in your business, but I am here to say that your business will have shifted. It will have changed when you have that kind of momentum behind you.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, guys, I mean, this is just me putting it out because every once in a while I get questions about hosting a podcast. They'll be like, Colie, well, what's your return on investment for hosting the podcast? And I tell people I spend $12,000 a year to produce this podcast for you guys. Between the time that it takes me, paying my podcast manager, paying my virtual assistant,
absolutely.
$12K a year. And I will tell you, I have still not made as much money off of this podcast as I have being a guest on other podcasts. So for any of you that are
I love to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, for any of you that are thinking to yourself, oh, well, no, I need a podcast in order to like monetize my speak. You don't. I mean, but again, I have a system for like tracking.
Of course you do.
Where people coming into my business, what podcast they came from, and then attributing their sales to their client record. I have a big, huge Airtable.
I love that.
But like, because I want to know.
Yes.
I mean, it's not just for podcast guesting. I mean, I track this for when I speak in people's memberships, which you already mentioned. Like every speaking engagement that I do, and I consider a podcast guest episode to be a speaking engagement. But every single one of those, I want to know what the return on investment was. Because let's say that I go on someone's podcast and no one signs up for my freebie. Is that about me? Is it about them? Is it maybe that the message that I put out wasn't as strong a topic as one that I put out on someone else's? Well, I don't know. But if I can't see on the back end that absolutely no one signed up for my freebie off of this episode, I will never have the knowledge to know that I need to go do my research.
I think I love that. And I think that's a really great point. And the other flip side of that is there are going to be podcast interviews that are going to, it's kind of a crass way to put it, but like, you're going to have one night stands and you're going to have long-term relationships. And what I mean by that is that some hosts you're going to really hit it off with, and that's going to be the beginning of a beautiful relationship where you guys are helping promote each other. You're teaching each other's group, XYZ. And there's going to be other people that you're going to go on their show. It's still valuable. You're still getting in front of your ideal audience. That's still content that you can still be repurposing. Absolutely. 100%. But that might just be it. You're still going to thank them. You're still going to be sharing the episode XYZ, but it may not move further than that. And I think that that's a good thing to put off kind of the back end of what you were just saying, Colie, which is like, sometimes you're going to see results from these shows and other shows you might not, sometimes you're going to have them pop off. Like sometimes you're going to be a show, you're going to be like, oh, dang, that was like amazing. Like I went on that show and I got so many leads off that, like so many people that got into my email, people DMing me, etc. And then you're going to have some shows where it's going to come out and you're going to be like, sad trombone. You know what I mean? And so I think that, yeah, exactly. So I think that when you talk about expectation setting, I think that's really important for you to realize too, is like, that's why we do so many shows. That's why we want to be so, consistent with the work that we're doing, with the knowledge that some aren't maybe going to yield the results that we were hoping they were going to, but we have all these other ones that have had a great return for us. So we know that our time has not been wasted.
I mean, that's a really good point about the relationships, Christina, because some of the best people that I've had on my podcast were people I was a guest on their podcast first.
Love that.
And so we already built a relationship. We knew that we liked each other. I mean, and listening audience, you guys have heard a few of them. I mean, these are the repeats that I have on my podcast. There's a reason why Dan comes on this podcast every 6 months. I could talk to him forever.
I love it.
But we're digressing. Christina, let's talk about repurposing.
Yes.
What is the most effective way to repurpose your guest episode from someone else's podcast?
Oh, I love this question, because I truly think that by guesting on shows, when it comes to content creation, you're standing at the top of the mountain and you just roll the snowball down, and all this stuff is going to come from that. And what I mean by that is every single episode that you do can be repurposed into so many things. There's, of course, social media snippets that you can be putting on there. You can either be doing audio snippets, you can be doing pull quotes. So that's something that's really nice to do, really easily shareable for people in that way as well. Of course, I want you sharing in your e-newsletter, your website, all that type of good stuff. But one of the most underutilized ways, or one of the ways that I really think people should be using it more, and I actually need to be better about this myself, I'll be completely honest, is taking each episode and turning it into a blog and backlinking in that blog. Because that is a really great way when someone types into Google, or they type into SEO. I'm an SEO expert. And type into Google. Nailing it. They type into that SEO work from having all the backlinks in the blog and stuff like that is a really, really great thing. Like, if I was to say to you truthfully, for me at least, like, if you're going to do nothing else, make them blogs. And so that's what I would really have on there and included in that blog. And then the other thing that I would have on those blog posts is an edited transcript that makes it really easy for those that might be hearing impaired, or anyone else that prefers to learn that way, that's there for them to be able to have as well. But that's something that you can have in your own power. You know what I mean? Don't necessarily rely on the host for that. You as a guest have the power to be just running that through Otter, editing it. You can do that. A VA can do that, etc. But have that in that blog post as well, or have a link to that as well there.
Absolutely. And Christina, I'm mind blown. I have never blogged a guest episode.
Oh, never. Yeah. Do it.
Never.
Do it.
I mean, I can't believe that I've never thought to do that. I mean, and maybe it's just me with like my old brain. Maybe I have actually blogged one of my episodes from Anami's podcast. I mean, that would actually, it was more than 3 years ago. I might have done my first one, but like, really, I'm not even going to give myself that kind of credit. I don't think I've ever blogged a guest episode, but now I know what I'm perhaps going to have Sarah do sometime.
That's an amazing thing for a VA or something like that to be helping you with, is to have them just do a blog. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be whatever, but be putting it in there, be backlinking, be talking about the episode a little bit, stuff like that. That's going to move the needle, in my opinion, than even those other areas that I talked about.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, guys, I mean, I know most of the listening audience has seen my Instagram feed. What I will do for Christina is the same thing that I do for everyone else. I take this episode, I throw it into Descript. My podcast manager edits it, and she selects the best under 60-second clips that we can turn into the social media content that I put on Instagram. And of course, when I put these from this episode, I will of course tag Christina in every single one. I also send them to my guests. Now, sometimes I forget, and some of my guests are like, "Hey, Colie, can I get a download of that?" And I'm like, "Absolutely. You should have already gotten one. I'm sorry, I've been out of town." But in general, I try to throw all of the assets that I create inside of a folder, and I send it to my guests so that if they want to include something in their email newsletter,
and they
want to post
by
it,
the way,
and they want to post it on their own Instagram account, whatever it is that they want to use it for, I am more than happy to provide those assets. Because what I was doing before I had my own podcast, I had hired this agency, and what they would do is you could send them long form content, whether it was you teaching, your Instagram lives, or your podcast guest episodes, I would send them to this agency and they would watch all of them. And then they would grab like the nuggets from all of them. They would make them into the pull quote cards. They would make me videos and they would send it to me every month to put on my Instagram and stuff. I mean, that was the best. They're not doing it anymore. That agency shut down.
I was like, girl, really I was sad. Like, you got to share that info with everybody.
I mean, I would, but they're not open anymore. So, I mean, now that's what I have Sarah do.
Yes.
That is now Sarah's job.
Yes.
But no, and I want to just say one more thing, because as a host, I would never be offended if someone wanted me to give them either a full copy of the episode or something so that they could repurpose. So if you've ever had, and I have also asked people for this, guys, so this is me talking from the other side of the microphone. I have reached out and asked people, hey, that was a super awesome podcast episode. I know that you don't show the video, or maybe they do. I'm like, but I know you don't provide the video, but can I have a copy of it so that my virtual assistant can repurpose some of it for myself? And I always ask, do you mind if we include a clip of you? Because there are some instances.
I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Where the host asked you a question and you kind of need that in order to get
you need the frame of reference. Yeah, exactly.
But if they don't feel comfortable, I always say, that's fine. I will just use the question as like,
have you ever had them not be comfortable?
No.
I would say to you guys, like, I think it's great. I 100% agree to ask that question. But I'm here to tell you that host wants their episode shared as much as they possibly can. So I've had people ask me that before. They're like, well, I don't understand how I can make snippets. It's not my content. It's not my episode. 100%. You're still going to give credit. Right? When you share those snippets, when you share this and that, I'm always tagging the host. I'm always saying what show, this is from, or that was on, etc. So I think it's fantastic to ask a question in that scenario, etc. But also know that I can't even imagine a scenario where that host would say no.
I mean, and I think initially the only reason that I would ask, well, number one,
I think it's good to ask. I think it's good. Yeah. I'm pro asking. Yes.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I would say if you get a no, it probably doesn't have anything to do with you guys. It's that the host records video and they are not what they would call like video ready. I mean, I see what you're saying. I personally don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I have a dress on for you. My hair is washed and combed, but that's just a coincidence.
You're a step ahead of me.
I would have just as easily showed up with like my mom.
Oh, like my mom bun? Like I'm rocking? Yeah.
I rock one like 6 of 7 days a week.
Yes.
So, I'm right there with you. But that would be the only reason that I would see someone saying no.
Yeah.
But honestly, by the time you ask them and the episode comes out and you've repurposed it, even if they weren't feeling great about being on the camera that day, that's probably passed by the time you ask them.
100%. Yeah. And the only other thing, and not that I don't really see this happening, but like the only thing I would say is if you were putting it behind a paywall, right? So if you were like, I'm going to take this interview and I'm going to drop it into my membership, that's a paid membership, that is something that a host could definitely say no to. Absolutely. 100%. I don't think that that's really happening very often. I think that's, I don't really see that being an issue, but I was just going to say that would be the other thing that you would definitely want to check with the host on.
Yeah, absolutely. Christina, I mean, if nothing else, I learned that I need to go blog my guest episodes that I've previously been on. But if the listening audience wants to know more about you, your agency, your offers, tell them where they can find you on the internet.
Absolutely. Come find me at podcastpublicityquiz.com. I'll make sure that Colie has that for the notes down below, but it is a really fun interactive quiz that can just help you determine what might make the most sense for you moving forward, whether that's doing it yourself, pitching yourself, or perhaps it's having an agency like ours pitch on your behalf.
Guys, definitely pitch yourself to be on podcasts. And the first one might feel rough, but I promise after the first one, it does get easier. I will tell you.
It absolutely gets easy. There's pitching, there's pitching yourself, and there's also being a guest and making sure that, also know that when you get those yeses, the first couple interviews you're going to sweat through. You're going to sweat. You're like, oh my gosh, like, am I doing this right?
It's totally normal to take a shower after.
It is 100% normal. It is 100% normal. And that is actually one thing I've had multiple clients say to me is they're like, one of the biggest things is like, I'm so crystal clear. Like, I feel so comfortable in front of a mic now. Whereas like before I started this work, I would just get so nervous, so clammy, etc. But once you've done this, because y'all are going to do it 24 times in 2024, we're making that deal, right? We're making that deal. So once you've done it, after 3-4 times, it's going to be nothing to you. You're going to feel a lot more comfortable. You're going to feel really good about doing this type of work.
Especially if you're getting your message across, guys.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone. I hope that you have gotten something from this episode. And if you didn't, you weren't listening. So just rewind it and listen to it again. That's it for this episode. See you next time.